Welcome back to Three Men and a Mystery. I'm one of the three men, John Lorden.
And this is Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
So we're continuing our conversation with Sarah Cailean. On April 3rd, Coley McCraney was in court for his preliminary hearing. And I hope you checked out last episode because we started the coverage of that hearing there. If you haven't, go back and listen to that before we continue here. I'd like to welcome back Sarah Cailean at this point. Hey, Sarah.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us again. And can you tell us really quickly about the show that you have coming up? Where can people see it and what's that about?
Oh, absolutely. So the show we have coming up, I was one half of an investigation / host team with my partner being Jax Miller, who's a crime writer. The two of us spent about 3 years investigating a series of unsolved homicides and disappearances out of Northeast Oklahoma. And it's a case that a lot of your listeners are probably familiar with, the Bible Freeman case, Ashley Freeman and Laura Bible, who went missing the night that Ashley's parents were shot and killed. Actually in 1999, so two 16-year-old girls in 1999, not
Wow.
too far off from your 17-year-old girls.
Yeah.
And the show sort of follows us over the course of about 3 years as we try to peel back some of the layers on that case and the complexities and why it had gone unsolved for so long. So the show will be airing on HLN the first 4 Sundays in June, so starting June 2nd at 9 p.m. And we're really excited about it. I hope that people will watch, and I hope that, kind of like what you guys are trying to do here, that we can shine a light on what happened in that case so that maybe the communities can be better served going forward.
Absolutely. So be sure to check your listings for Hell in the Heartland on HLN. All right. So we started the coverage last episode. We're looking at tweets that were basically coming from the reporters in the courtroom during the preliminary hearing. We've now gotten to the point where David Harrison, one of the attorneys working for Coley McCraney, is starting his cross-examination. So we still have Lieutenant Brian on the stand, the investigator. He's asking, McCraney had a pistol. That was your testimony. Brian says, yes, that's right. Harrison then says, military report shows no mention of a 9mm pistol found on McCraney. Brian and Harrison are going back and forth on whether the weapon was found. The report only explicitly mentions that a 9mm ammunition and a cartridge was found on civilian McDaniels involved in a previous arrest. Brian says the Hi-Point handgun is listed as belonging to suspect, though. Harrison contends that the pistol actually belonged to McDaniels. And even the media, we don't know who this McDaniels person is. We don't know how any of this is tying in because we don't have access to the military records that they're all looking at. But now there's some question about, that simple statement we heard in the last episode that, Coley has a 9mm Hi-Point specifically. Now we're hearing from the defense that no, the gun wasn't found necessarily. It was ammunition and a cartridge. And by the way, that stuff actually belonged to Coley's friend. So
what was McDaniel's first name? I'm sorry.
It's not mentioned, unfortunately.
I was going to try and find him. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I would have done the same. So do you guys think are we talking about the murder here or the murder weapon?
The fact it's the make is a possible make of that gun. I don't know how common that weapon is.
Very, very common, and they're incredibly cheap. Without getting myself sued by the fine people at Hi-Point, they're garbage guns. They're just kind of a joke. At least in the law enforcement community, we always sort of joke about and he had a Hi-Point, so I wasn't nervous.
Wow.
Yeah, they're I mean, like $100, for a handgun. It's as opposed to, probably starting at $5 or $6 for a good Glock or a SIG. So,
yeah. Well, and we also have the fact that if the date is right about when this occurrence happened in 2004 from this record, that would be 5 years after the fact. Sarah, would it be likely for someone to keep the actual weapon that they used and got away with this murder supposedly for 5 years?
You want to say that no, it wouldn't be very bright, but like I said in the last episode, I feel like a lot of what he did, a lot of the behavior that he exhibited, if it was him who committed the crime, seems counterintuitive when we all sort of sit here and try and think things through logically.
Yeah.
But you have to remember, we're not thinking about somebody who, who does things logically. And I would say, almost like we talked about with the DNA last time, it may just be that, after a point he thought he'd gotten away with it for so long, it really didn't seem like that big of a deal.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We often joke that we don't catch the smart ones. I don't know how else to put that,
I hope you write a book someday of all these catchphrases that law enforcement uses.
Yeah, no, that's funny. I am actually working on a book. I will now include the catchphrases. I hadn't thought of that.
It's a great idea. It gives us such great insight into what that job is like. All right. So back to the tweets. They're now talking about the rape charge. Harrison pretty much questioning whether she had been raped. He's building to consensual sex. Mm-hmm. That would explain the semen. Brian, at the urging of Harrison, now reading there were no injuries to Ms. Beasley's private area. So it sounds like they're actually reviewing the autopsy report information there. Harrison states, finding McCraney's semen in JB's body does not mean he raped her. Brian says it is because he contradicted his previous statement of not knowing the girls. So they're definitely using that to kind of club this argument together that he's the guy, the fact that he didn't come forward and say that he knew them. But is that really enough to imply that a rape happened here?
And I think it goes back to what we mentioned in the last episode. One of the things we brought up is if somehow what he said to them winds up being inadmissible, does the part get thrown out to where he says that he didn't know them? And now all the jury gets to see is this statement that he does know them.
Again, this is, we're dealing with so many ifs and whens and buts. So we don't know when he invoked the attorney versus when he may have made the statement that he didn't know them. And again, we say if you were intelligent, you almost from the beginning would be saying, I knew her, she and I were seeing each other on the side. But again, if he's just sort of frozen up now, all of a sudden he's being questioned and he's just going to try and deny. And it's always possible too. It is possible that they were having a fling. But that also doesn't mean, if he didn't physically rape her, it doesn't mean he didn't kill them, that he wasn't the last one with them. Yeah, I don't know. There's just so many questions. I'm sorry to draw a blank, but the fact that they give the timeline of when Tracie was shot versus when JB was shot really kind of changes the whole scope of it. Like, what reason does he have to shoot Tracie if the relationship with JB is consensual?
That's a really, really good question.
I think it comes down to proving, the whole case to me, it comes down to proving whether or not that Coley knew JB. That's it. I mean, if they can somehow prove that he didn't, but it could have been something where JB was hiding the fact that she knew him, and then he'll never be able to prove that. So then it comes down to a jury just deciding based on the rest of the evidence.
It could be the other way around too. It could be that, we discussed the sort of precipitating factors or the things that will cause somebody to behave with violence. And, we talked about the fact that he was being sued for paternity and he had just the day before been, ordered to give DNA. And if he feels like he's about to lose his home and his life and his girlfriend through that, if at the same time he had been seeing JB, secretly, maybe she was about to expose him for that or was making demands on him, or maybe he was with her and Tracie was like, this is ridiculous. Does your girlfriend know you're here? And that was what ultimately led to it. So, the two of them having consensual sex does not eliminate him from the possibility of having been the murderer.
Right. But I think they're going to try to bring that up because they could then kind of blow out the timeline. They can say, well, actually, he met up with JB earlier that day. And, this is an act that was committed completely by someone else.
And she just left semen on her arm and her clothes all day? Yeah.
No, there's certainly some logic flaws that can be pointed out in that argument as well. I think I see where they're trying to crack the door open for the possibility that this is not all occurring at that same time, which will be
and
interesting.
He is deploying his only out. Like his only out is that he knew her and it was consensual. That's it. And if he'd been planning for 20 years, he doesn't seem like it, because unless he wasn't sure they had his DNA right at that first meeting, so he said, well, but he already did know that, didn't he? Didn't he already?
You would have to think so. I mean, it was just it was everywhere for years.
They wanted to essentially exclude, or not exclude him, but they were trying to match closer to somebody in the family. So he knew they had DNA by January when he gave the DNA sample.
So then why would he still continue with that ruse? That's wild. I mean,
so one of the things that's interesting when I first read the search warrant paperwork, there's a lot of, when you do a warrant, you have to give very, very detailed information of exactly what you want and exactly why. You can't just say, we're going to go search in their house and see what we come up with. You have to say, we are looking for this cell phone. We believe it will be in this place. Like, you have to really specify the parameters of the search. And they list very, very specifically all types of electronic devices that they believe he has. So like they specifically say like an iPad, I think, or an iPhone, multiple phones and stuff. And I would imagine that the reason for that is that between the DNA that he submitted in January and when he gave a statement to the police in the middle of March, that in those 2 months, they think they're going to find communications between him and somebody else where they're trying to either concoct a story or somebody who knows the truth he's freaking out to, something like that. But it does seem that even in those 2 months, you would have come up with a better answer than to go in and say, I did not know her. I did not know either of them. You would have started from the beginning saying, I did know them. I had a relationship with her.
Right. Well, so is that bending you towards him being guilty or innocent?
I mean, I've ever since we found out the stuff from the Air Force, I'm certainly of the mind that this is a person who's capable of what happened. Yep.
So Harrison, the whole court thing takes a really interesting twist here. Harrison starts now referring to the haunting evidence show where psychics were brought in to find clues. Sarah, did you watch? I think it's called Haunted Evidence, if I remember right.
I tried. I couldn't.
You tried. Yeah. I think that's how most of us feel about it. Chief Tony Spivey and Deputy Chief Henderson were interviewed by the show. Harrison just asked Brian to look into a crystal ball to find out who killed the girls, referring to the haunted evidence psychics. He literally pulled a crystal ball out of his pocket and showed it to the guy and said, hey, do you want to find out who killed the girls? Here, look into the crystal ball. Let me know.
At the preliminary hearing, right?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
It's kind of hilarious, but it's also kind of weird. It's something I'd expect to see like on a TV show, with like some hotshot lawyer. That's
So attorneys, there's a lot more showmanship for court than you would think. I mean, very few cases actually end up going to trial, as we know. But the ones that do, obviously, are these sort of more serious, high-profile cases. And there is room for flair. And we are talking Alabama. There are some showmen. I'm not terribly surprised. It's usually that for the benefit of the jury, though. So it is funny that they would do that in like a pretrial thing.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, who did he show the crystal ball to?
To the investigator that was sitting on the stand.
Yeah, I think he's trying to get them back on their heels. He's trying to say, I'm going to make you look like such fools.
Right.
It doesn't help. I mean, like I said, a lot of this stuff I feel like was done really well. It feels like, the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. But at the same time, on a typed up arrest report, they spelled the word capital incorrectly multiple times.
Right.
In terms of a capital murder. So that's what he's going to do, is to say that this is Keystone Cops. They don't know what they're doing, and they're making a mess out of a man who had an affair and didn't want his girlfriend to know. I
think that's really good insight, because the next tweet we get is Harrison now asking about how many people have confessed to this crime. Brian says he wasn't involved in the investigation at that time.
Right.
They then ask about Johnny Barentine. Brian didn't know anything about Johnny William Barentine, the first man arrested and charged in the girls' murders. Are you surprised that an investigator working on this case would not know about something like that they tried to run charges against someone on this before?
Yes. I mean, I knew that they arrested Johnny Barentine, and I don't have anything to do with the case.
That's what I don't get about that.
I mean, maybe he misunderstood the question, or maybe what he was saying was, I don't know anything about it. I can't speak to the details of that case because I wasn't part of the investigating team at that time.
Sure.
So without seeing the actual transcripts, I mean, it's possible that the defense attorney asked him that. He said, I don't know anything about that, and he didn't let him elaborate. It does seem like an amateur hour to just say, I don't know about it. There's no way you could be working this case and not know something about the fact that Barentine was arrested, and then and sort of all that background stuff about claiming reward money was the motive. And
yeah. Well, keep that thought in the back of your mind as we move on here. Harrison pointed out that McCraney denied involvement like Barentine did, but was charged with capital murder ×5. Brian responded that the semen is the key piece of evidence here, which I think we all agree with. I mean, we knew how important that was looking into this. Part of the basis of us doing this show was we wanted to help promote them reaching out to Parabon and getting that test done. So now we have Chief Marlos Walker taking the stand. But before that, we are going to go to a commercial break. We'll be back right after this message. Sometimes in this line of work, investigating just sucks up all of our time and literally eats up our day. And by the time we get to dinner, we're not always doing the best in terms of making good choices. Well, thankfully, there's a company named HelloFresh that can help with that. HelloFresh is a meal kit delivery service that shops, plans, and delivers step-by-step recipes and pre-measured ingredients so you can just cook, eat, and enjoy. And HelloFresh was kind enough to send us all samples. We've all gotten to try it and do our own recipes. Morph, what do you think of HelloFresh?
I thought it was great. My wife and I got to spend more time with the kids instead of grocery shopping and meal planning. And I tried the cheddar chicken fajitas, and they were excellent.
What was amazing for me is that they provided these 6 easy steps to follow on these cards and a picture of what the food should look like at the end. So I made the meals on my own, and they tasted absolutely incredible. Something that you could buy at a restaurant.
They have 3 different plans that you can choose from: a classic plan, a veggie plan, which was great because I'm a vegetarian and the food was really, really good, as well as a family plan. And you can switch those up at any point. You can also tell them how many meals you want per week, how many people you're feeding with those meals. It is really customizable. They pushed me outside of my comfort zone. I made a risotto, and I'm totally impressed by that. It was so easy with HelloFresh. I just followed the 6 steps, and pretty soon I was enjoying great, great food. You can try it yourself and get $80 off of your first month of HelloFresh. Just go to HelloFresh.com/3men. That's with the number 3. And use promo code 3men. Once again, with the number 3. You'll get $20 off of your first 4 boxes. That's like receiving 8 meals for free. So give them a try. Head over to HelloFresh.com and remember to use that promo code 3men. Welcome back, and please remember that our sponsors are helping to support our investigation and our efforts to help these families, so please show them the same respect. All right, continuing here, Chief Marlos Walker is taking the stand, and these are the tweets. Ozark Chief of Police Marlos Walker has taken the stand. He states, "We started asking questions on genealogical databases after the breakthrough in the Golden State Killer case. Marlos is being questioned about the DNA. How was it collected, tested, and stored? Defense is trying to place doubt in the genetic genealogy technique." Now, I've seen some comments from Harrison where he's being interviewed publicly, and he's definitely doing that. I think he called it "do not ask" at one point. And he's trying to say that Parabon is, doing this because they need fame, that it's, good for their business to make.
Not how scientific labs work. They don't care if anybody knows who they are.
Seriously. And Parabon, they've been cracking. I mean, they cracked, some huge cases at this point. They don't operate like that. No. As a matter of fact, next episode, we're going to hear from the CEO of Parabon and learn a whole lot more about the whole DNA angle on this. But
oh, that's great.
Yeah, but Sarah, from what you're hearing, there's no angle, right, in terms of Parabon manipulating results here, or this being.
No, I think in a way, I feel like this defense attorney, for as showy as he seems to be, he's kind of telegraphing what he's going to do with the jury, which I'm not sure is a great strategy. Because basically, he knows that the judge and the cops in that room know very well that Parabon isn't in this for money or fame, that they don't care, that they're a neutral arbiter. But he can maybe convince a jury that that's the case, that it's this, ragtag operation that, flies by the seat of their pants and doesn't know what they're doing. And then that would, hopefully be enough for reasonable doubt. I don't know why he's showing the prosecution that that's what he's going to do, though, because it's just going to allow them to prepare in advance.
Yeah, I'd almost like to think that he's doing that to kind of pull their focus to that as an approach of his, because it's such a weak approach. I don't see it working. We already know that the public in general at this point almost trusts DNA too much.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So how are you going to try to roll this into, getting 12 people to believe that, the DNA isn't holding up?
It might be that the subset of that is that's why, they believe DNA is so solid, so we have to cast doubt on the lab that handled the DNA. And we do know that there have been some state labs that have been in trouble because they've not handled DNA right, or they've fully just manufactured results. This, I'd be very surprised to find out that that's what was going on at Parabon, because the reason that state lab techs were doing it was because they were trying to up the odds of a conviction. So when you've got somebody, just a neutral third party that doesn't care one way or the other,
right,
it's even less likely that they're sloppy with the evidence.
Yeah, and Parabon has already made their money, right? They charge a fee off the top just to start the analysis. So there's no benefit to them after the fact to turn in a crappy analysis. They could just come back and say, hey, you know what, we weren't able to help you and the results didn't pan out.
In fact, it's against their best interest. If they get a reputation as not doing great science, then all of this goes away that they're doing right now.
Yeah, and Parabon didn't specifically point them to McCraney. They came back with a list of likely donors based on the genealogy, based on that family tree, and said, one of these names is most like your suspect. It wasn't, hey, this guy McCraney's your suspect.
Right.
They just happened to go to him first, and he was the right guy according to what they've stated.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be a very strong position for the defense. But so the second defense attorney, Andrew Scarborough, starts taking some questions or making points, I guess. Previous genealogical evidence is not infallible. He's now referring to Walker's statement that DNA doesn't lie. He continues stating that Johnny Barentine wasn't charged with rape. And they put a note in here. Keep in mind, this is the reporter sitting in the courtroom. The Southeast Sun reported in 1999 that there were no early signs of rape in the investigation back then. The defense continues, bringing up the Johnny Barentine case. He confessed, was charged, and those charges later dismissed in 1999. Chief Walker, says he's not familiar with the case. I just want to let that sit for a moment with everyone.
So this is clearly a strategy that the prosecutor has decided, basically, that everybody on their team just has to say, I don't know, I'm not talking about it.
It has to be, right? It cannot be logical that Walker has spare time to read up on Golden State Killer.
Right.
But the biggest case that's in his area, he's not going to do the research and actually find out about, the previous charges that were run against this guy.
As we discussed, he's born and raised. He's a local boy. So
exactly,
of course he knew every single facet of that investigation. It just has to be that the prosecution does not want it to come in that Barentine was ever even charged, because that was a mistake. That's why the grand jury returned a no bill, because it was so clear that he didn't do it. Now, the other thing that's interesting is that everybody since then, they dismissed anybody who came along as a suspect. If they were excluded, it was purely because the DNA was not a match.
Right.
So they have definitely been pursuing the angle, essentially since Barentine, that the DNA was on her clothes, that we knew of on her clothes, was connected to this case. Because otherwise there were some very interesting suspects that were completely excluded just based on the fact that their DNA didn't match. And, the defense, that may be sort of where they're going too, is that ultimately you're going to have to go back, and if they can propose alternate theories of the case, if they can propose alternate suspects, I mean, that's the biggest way to get somebody acquitted, is to say, here's an alternate theory.
Right. And they don't have to prove
reasonable doubt. Right.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. They just have to say, this guy could have done it, and the only reason he was excluded was DNA, and our guy has an excuse for his DNA, therefore reasonable doubt.
And I'm still trying to get clarification, just to go back to your point. It wasn't the defense attorney saying that Chief Walker didn't know about Johnny Barentine. It was Chief Walker himself that said that. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Walker says he's not familiar with the case against Barentine.
Well, what's interesting is this kind of reminds me that it seems like that's a strategy sometimes that prosecutors use when previous people have said things that are counter to the narrative that they now want to sell. Like, in the Jodi Arias case, you had the gunshot was first, and then the prosecutor wanted to go with, knife first. So then they had to sort of discredit their own people at trial, saying they remembered things wrong. Oh, right. I don't remember ever talking to that person.
Yeah, that definitely, the fact that they're just sort of all towing a party line where it's like, nope, nobody knows anything about that. What are you even talking about? Who is Johnny Barentine? That is just there. Because otherwise, if they even acknowledge, because one, you can't prove that somebody knows the intimate details of the case.
Aren't they under oath at this point, though?
They are under oath, and I guess that they could kind of pedal out of that and say, I wasn't on the investigating team and I didn't really study it. I am not qualified to speak to that part of the case. And they wouldn't, that's not lying. They're probably not qualified to speak to it necessarily. And so they are, because by virtue of the fact that they're with the agency, and if they studied it, they would be in a position to talk about it. But it's definitely a gray area. It's sort of like when people say on the stand, I don't recall. They probably recall, but you can't really call them out on it and call it perjury.
That's so funny. I was just going to say, I don't recall is the number one way to get out of something. And again, in the Arias case, you have the medical examiner saying, I don't recall ever saying that. And it's like, well, it's right there on paper. You wrote that.
Yeah.
But
well, for all of us guys that are married too, the I don't recall never works with the Y. So
yes, and as a wife, I can tell you it doesn't work. Because it either means you're lying or you weren't listening, and neither looks great for you. So
definitely. Hold on, I'm taking notes as we're going through this. Do not try the I don't recall defense.
Never works with my wife.
So we all know Johnny Barentine's case pretty well. And I know, Sarah, you listen to our episodes about that as well. What do you think they would be afraid of in terms of information about Johnny's case coming into play here?
Well, two things. If they could say that Johnny was a viable suspect, then that just adds his name to that list that we were just talking about of people who are like that they could present an alternate theory. The other thing is that it makes them look like an incompetent agency.
Right.
So, and that is sort of the biggest thing. I think almost everybody's takeaway who really studies this stuff was that, Barentine was just not ever going to be convicted of this or ever even really involved in this. And if they can make it look like these guys rushed into that, then it just looks like, oh, they're just rushing again. This is what they do.
So it's a character attack almost.
Not even character as much as skill set.
Yeah.
Double homicide and sexual assault is a really serious crime. It's really serious. And if you don't have the skill set for it, if you don't have officers with the training to handle that, then you should turn it over to the state. The state agencies will step in these cases for these small agencies. I'm kind of surprised that it's still all just a local case, to be honest. The state can't come in and take over unless there's a reason to believe that the agency was involved in some way. But they could ask the state for support. Right. And the fact that they're prosecuting this just as a as the Dothan Police Department or Ozark Police Department. That's what they're setting themselves up for. Is they're going to say you're not qualified to handle this kind of a case.
This reminds me of one of the first points that you and I talked about when we were initially discussing this case. I hope I got this right. I hope it was you, but I think I sent you a list of all the different agencies that were involved here, and we were discussing the possibility that, was this type of, like a cover-up type situation where the police are involved in some way and they're trying to cover their tracks on that. And you were very clear about, look at how much help they pulled in here. Look at all these different agencies.
Absolutely. And I still believe that. And they did pull in different agencies at different times. But the fact that they are still lead and point on this, and it doesn't, or at least right now, it doesn't look like anybody else is involved. And that was me. Yes, I do recall that conversation. Right. And I do think, this case that the Oklahoma one that I've been on for the last few years, there are real questions not only about the competence of some of the agencies involved, but in fact the integrity, whether or not they were on the up and up. And I don't think that's, at least on the surface, it certainly does not look like that's the case here.
But in this town, I think it's important to note that there's a big, I don't know the percentage, but there's a big amount of people down there that do have those same concerns as you have in your Oklahoma case.
Right. Now that though is a phenomenon that happens in almost any long unsolved case. Right. You pick any unsolved case and you go ask people in the community about it if it's a fairly well-known one, and they're going to say, I think there's a cover-up. This other case that I'm working in Alabama, I've got multiple witness statements over the years that have been submitted to the agency responsible for it, where they're like, wow, I don't know, there was a deputy who went to her house that day. I mean, it's just what happens. But when you step back and examine it, it's actually pretty rare that's really what happened. I mean, it happens. There are some really awful people wearing badges in this country. But I don't think that's what's going on here.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was the conclusion. Defense wraps with Walker. Prosecution has no questions for him. The hearing ends. The judge says the court has found probable cause to send the 5 charges to the grand jury. So what happens from here, Sarah, in your experience with cases like this?
I think it's going to be a very different outcome than Barentine. I think when they did rush things with Barentine, and that's why they didn't get the grand jury did not choose to indict. I'll be pretty surprised if they don't indict here. It's pretty strong. I mean, there are places, there are definitely holes that the defense has room to breathe, but that's just not the standard for a grand jury. I think they're going to get an indictment out of it.
Yeah.
Do you know when it comes to?
I don't. But from at least based on what happened with Johnny, they turned around fairly quickly. So I have a feeling that this grand jury meets on a pretty regular basis. So.
Oh yeah, I would imagine, and it's I mean the idea of speedy trial is very real unless the defendant is waiving that. And in this case, we know that he was, there's no bond. He's being held. So,
right.
They're going to want to at least get this part up and running as quickly as possible. They're not going to waive that.
Yeah, that is one of the most recent legal documents that has been filed. Is it does look like they're trying to set a motion for some type of bond to be set, and they've sent over a whole bunch of legal precedents to try to support that. I don't know if they'll actually wind up getting that or not. And honestly, this is the type of case where if it does come through the grand jury, it does get indicted, they do go to schedule it. I mean, we could be looking at years before this thing actually shows up in a courtroom, right?
We could be. I mean, yeah, they all move a lot more slowly than TV would. Even the best of, legal procedural shows, people are on the witness stand with bruises from, the incident. It'll certainly be longer than that, but I would imagine the indictment will happen pretty soon. And then depending on whether or not he gets bond, I don't think he will. I mean, when they laid out the financial hardship stuff, so he's got, a court, his attorneys are court appointed, if I'm reading that correctly.
Right. Well, it looked like they were going to be. And then I think it was actually retracted. There's a little handwritten note on the bottom of one of those requests. So I think what probably happened was, these defense attorneys we've been talking about caught wind of the case and probably took it pro bono is what I'm expecting.
They just jumped in. Okay.
I think so.
I don't know. I'll be very surprised if he gets bond of any kind. They're going to say he's possibly a flight risk, or that, because he's got these addresses all over the place. Right. Which he can counter and say he doesn't have any money, because they laid up, not no money, but he's not in a position to, flee the country or anything. And that he has strong ties to the community is what they always say. And he's got his church and he's got, a big family there. So it's possible, but this is, it's double murder and felony rape. I'd be really surprised if he gets a bond that he can afford.
Well, let's do a quick roundtable on this. Based on what we've heard over the past 2 episodes, what do you think? Is Coley McCraney the man that we've all been looking for nearly 20 years? Gray?
I think he is very likely to be the person. It's the the small window of time. It was his semen, and there's no evidence that he knew her, and also he had the military record. And when you put all that together, it kind of shows that he's capable and that he likely is the person, but that might not be good enough for a jury.
Morph?
I've been saying all along since the very beginning that the person who owned that DNA was going to have some serious explaining to do. Most of the time, I think when this kind of thing happens, that DNA belongs to the killer. And I still lean towards that being the case, but we also know some things sort of that haven't been released that we're still pondering that lead me to have some lingering questions. And I also think it comes down to what the jury believes, because if the jury accepts that he did know them and they did have some consensual relationship, is there anything else that ties him to that crime? Are there fingerprints, palm prints, any witnesses, anything else at all that ties him to that murder other than that DNA? And then it comes down to, what does the jury believe?
Sarah?
I think any information that could get presented at trial that we haven't had on hand for these conversations could certainly change the perspective a little bit. But for me, what I've been, spent most of my adult life studying are the sort of patterns in these behaviors and why people do the things they do and how frequently they do them. And the stuff coming to light about impulsive crimes of violence in his past certainly lead me to think that they have a very, very good suspect here. And then when you add that to the fact that there was DNA on her and in her belonging to him, I think it's going to, the defense has a tough road ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to agree. And I'm actually hoping that more physical evidence comes out. We do know about the palm print on the trunk. I don't know if that's going to wind up matching him. We have heard that there was possibly some other prints that were found. I don't know if any of those are going to come back to match him. There was even a mystery item that was kind of brought up at one point by Chief Spivey. I'm wondering if any of those things are going to come back and really help solidify this case. In terms of the type of person he is, by looking at his public persona, it's kind of tough. It's tough for me to make a call there, but starting to find out these details that were not public records and, what are these charges actually about, I think is a really important aspect. And they are certainly starting to paint a picture of someone that might be capable of doing something like this. So I really just truly hope that I hope this isn't a largely circumstantial case. I hope that they do drill into some more of the physical evidence to really put this thing together. But I think we're going to have to wait a little time for that. Yep. Any final comments?
You're talking about the palm prints. I'd love to see if they have prints from inside the car too. That would be an interesting, because the procedure of how he went about getting them from one place to another. If he was walking and they offered him a ride or something, and then from in the vehicle he pulled out a gun or something. It'd be interesting to see if they can put him inside the vehicle or with his hand on that trunk.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think I could speak for all three of us when I say I want to give a very, very big thank you to Sarah Cailean for joining us, for discussing this over the past episodes. We really appreciate your time and expertise on all this. And I want to remind everyone out there, if you want to see some more of Sarah's fine work, remember to watch Hell in the Heartland on HLN June 2nd at 9 p.m. and just book your Sundays for 4 Sundays in a row. Take that ride with Sarah and see if they can help that case as well. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. It's been really interesting and actually a lot of fun. I think you guys are doing killer work here, so to speak.
Really,
it was great talking to you, Sarah.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah,
thanks,
yeah,
guys.
thanks a lot, Sarah.
Looking forward to our next lunch.
Absolutely. All right.
So a lot of you were probably on the last live, and you've already hit the subscribe and notification bell. So if you weren't there, make sure you do the same thing. Go to Gray Hughes Investigates, hit the notification bell and the subscribe button, and you'll be notified when it comes out. Now, this next live will be on July 31st, and that happens to be the 20-year anniversary of this senseless tragedy.
You can also find video versions of our podcast at my YouTube channel, Lord and Arts. And since we're intentionally trying to raise exposure using each of our platforms, remember, you can always find all the information and links that you need for any specific episode all together in one place at www.threemenandamystery.com, and that's with the number 3. You'll also find contact info there for local law enforcement and both legal teams. So if you have information to help shine the light of truth on this case, please send that in.
And if you have any feedback, corrections, or new details, you can send them to us via email at threemenandamystery.com, or you can reach out to us on Twitter with the handle 3 Men and a Mystery, or find us on Facebook. And if you're looking for another true crime podcast to listen to while you're waiting for the next episode of 3 Men and a Mystery, consider listening to Murderish. Here's a sample.
Hi, I'm Jamie, host of Murderish, a true crime podcast that provides a 3D look at gripping murder cases from beginning to end. You'll get to know the victims and perpetrators, how their worlds collided, and what went down during trial. I also share some of my own personal experiences, like the time a stranger came into my bedroom at night. Yeah, that really happened, and I walk you through all the details of that terrifying night. Have you ever wanted to be a fly on the wall during a murder trial? You'll get that opportunity on Murderish, as I share my experience being a jury foreman on a first-degree murder trial. Search Murderish in your favorite podcatcher app, hit subscribe, and start binging. And remember, listening to this podcast doesn't make you a murderer. It just means you're murder-ish.
3 Men and a Mystery is produced by John Lorden, Mike Morford, and Gray Hughes.
Please rate and review us on the podcasting platform that you found us on, and help us grow by telling your friends and family about us.
We hope you'll join us on the next episode, where we will hear from Parabon Nanolabs, GEDmatch, and DNA genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick as we learn all about the technology that brought Coley McCraney's name to law enforcement. I'm John Lorden.
This is Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
And we are 3 Men and a Mystery.